Welcome to the Omega Podcast with Dr. Elizabeth Adams. In this episode, we explore her journey at the intersection of technology, leadership, and responsible artificial intelligence. We also discuss her new book, In the Age of Artificial Intelligence, Choosing Purpose Before Code, and the deeper questions of purpose and humanity in an accelerating digital world.
Welcome to the Omega Podcast with Dr. Elizabeth M. Adams. She is a thought leader at the intersection of technology, leadership, and society, with a deep focus on responsible artificial intelligence, drawing on more than 2 decades of experience. She explores how organizations can develop and use AI in ways that are intentional, ethical, and aligned with human values. Dr. Elizabeth Adams, it is such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Keenan. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so excited for this conversation.
So am I, and I know our audience is riveted by your accomplishment, your book launch, as well as your tenure in the AI space. But for our audience members that may not know who you are, is there anything that you would like to share?
Well, I think you covered it. And so I've been in the AI space for almost 12 years now, and I've seen a lot. I've done a lot. I've seen the trends. I've been a part of the thought leadership to lead towards some trends. And so I'm really just excited to have the conversation because I do bring a depth of knowledge and experience from the responsible AI lens.
Fabulous. And I know that is a hot topic in our business marketplace. People are leveraging AI, agentic solutions. They're talking about the intelligent enterprise of the future and how more than 80% of mundane tasks will be automated by 2030. That is a huge milestone in the era of technological advancement. But your book, which is entitled In the Age of Artificial Intelligence, Choosing Purpose Before Code, can you share with our listeners why you choose purpose before code and what is a real-world example where that principle was ignored and what happened as a result of that?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And so as I mentioned, my career has spanned over 10 to 12 years. And I just saw so many people rushing towards AI, specifically in the last 3 years, generative AI. How do we create efficiencies? How do we do a lot of these things? But what was missing was the tie to an organization's values. So many organizations, you can go out to their About page and you can see all of these wonderful mission and value statements. But when companies were pursuing AI, a lot of that was ignored, some intentionally and some not. And so that's what the responsible AI framework does. It helps you put those values back into the design and development. And so I've been a part of several organizations. One we can talk about in the city of Minneapolis, where the city of Minneapolis made decisions to deploy certain AI surveillance technologies into public spaces. And on surface, they might think that that's a great idea. And this was back in 2020. But without understanding and bringing in community stakeholder experiences and insights, those AI technologies could have produced harm in the situation, specifically around facial recognition. There's demonstrated cases of where facial recognition alone being used has created harm for families and individuals. And so part of this book that I wrote was just about my own leadership journey, about really trying to insert purpose and values into an organization's thought process around how they either procure AI, design, or develop it. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I do just want to highlight, even in civic spaces, why it's important to choose purpose, choose your constituents, to choose the values that they hold dear as well, which is wanting to live in a society with safe technology.
Absolutely. Living in a society with safe technology, really understanding stakeholders. I mean, with that particular response, with the work you've done in facial recognition, I'm sure that you've observed computer vision as a leading component to that as well. Do you believe the current pace of AI development leaves enough room for meaningful ethical reflection? Or has speed already outpaced governance? You mentioned your work with the city. I mean, you probably have done work with governments as well. Do you see there being some sort of misalignment there?
Well, I think there is room, but the room has to be created and curated with intention. So, for instance, there are a ton of responsible AI frameworks that map directly to an organization's principles and values. So, and they can come from any organization that an organization decides to choose to help them in their journey, whether that's Deloitte or Accenture or the National Institute of Standards, their AI risk management framework, or something in Europe. But it has to be an intentional part of design and development. And part of that is creating a vision for why an organization wants to have AI in the first place, and then creating the boundaries. That could mean an internal AI governance group that helps usher AI through the particular gates, but also includes stakeholder feedback, employee stakeholder feedback, community and client, and so forth. So yes, there is tons of room because people are talking about it. When I started 10 years ago, we were sounding the alarm about why it's needed. Now across the globe, there are many, many voices that are championing ethical and responsible and trustworthy AI. We just have to make the conversation intentional.
Yes, good conversation, intentional. And I think when it comes to these deployment of agentic solutions, it's typically top down, from the executives to the directors, managers, et cetera. What is the most misunderstood idea about responsible AI among executives and builders today?
Wow, I love that question. Most people, and I think that some of us in the responsible AI space need to own up to some of this, is that people tend to think that responsible AI means slowing innovation. And it means that you've got to put all these check marks and check boxes and documents in place. And what responsible AI is a practice. And so you're not ever going to get to be responsible AI day one. It's a practice. It's about incorporating and integrating certain principles in the day-to-day culture of that particular organization.
Yeah, being able to do an organizational diagnostic, being able to understand what are the key stakeholders and how are these specific solutions impacting them on a day-to-day basis. But I think for many that are listening, they may not be able to discern between the technical advisory portion that we're discussing, but the philosophical existential. So at what point did your work in responsible AI shift from being primarily technical advisory to something more philosophical or existential?
Oh, I like that. So my work has never been technical. I will say that from day one. I've not coded. I have never been someone that was deeply involved in the ones and zeros. I led, prior to my AI life, a systems integration lab with 200 people, $54 million operation, where I had to learn very quickly to depend on the people who were closest to the work and those who were going to be recipients of the work for their particular insights. So my focus has always been on the output of a particular system, because there would be too many nuances to get engaged with if you try to unpack that black box. Does that make sense? Someone over here in one department can say, no, I did all my things. And someone over here can say, no, I have the right thresholds. But at the end of the day, what is the output of that particular system? And does it cause harm or not to someone? And then can we backtrack? Part of what I realized in my work, in my leadership arc is, as I mentioned, I've always been employee focused, always wanted to have their lens front and center. And I realized that even in employee stakeholder engagement, there might be 30% that are technical, but there's the other 70% with very brilliant ideas who are close to the work, where systems have not been traditionally designed to incorporate their feedback when you're talking about AI, design and development, procurement, and or use. And so that's where I lead, because if you are a customer care agent and you're dealing with the outputs of a bot, and a customer reaches you after spending 20 minutes with that bot, it makes sense that they would be involved in either helping to create the script for that bot or understand what the AI was intended to do, so that when that human reaches them, they have some sort of empathy and understanding of what that experience is like. And it should also tie to their own experience. And so for me, it's always been about ensuring that the entire organization has a pathway to participate in shaping the future of their organization's AI journey.
Absolutely. And one thing that was really key in your recent response is these outputs that these system integrations are and how they're impacting people in real time. And I know from your recent interviews that you've shared extensively of the downside of AI decision making when it comes to bias, when it comes to racial profiling, when it comes to misalignment from detecting from human error, from, physical harm and violence. But was there a specific moment or project or decision that made you step back and rethink your relationship with technology entirely?
Oh, yes. And I call that responsible AI drift. And I can't say it was a moment, it was a series of moments that led there. And so what I explain about responsible AI drift is you have all of these people working, I was doing all the things, and then somehow I just became disinterested in what I was saying. Responsible AI became very tactical, meaning this is how you do things. This is the group you need to set up. These are the types of experts you need to have on your internal governance board. These are the reporting models. This is how you do feedback and monitoring. And we started to have conversations where AI was leading as opposed to our own judgment. And I felt like we were outsourcing our judgment to either frameworks or even to AI. And so that moment happened about a couple years ago. And I said, if I'm going to continue in this space, I'm going to have to take a step back and kind of reorient my leadership and my desire to participate. And so what that meant was spending a year listening, spending a year talking to tons of organizations, and then figuring out where I wanted to play. And that's how my book came about, is Choosing Purpose Before Code. And so now I'm very, very clear. I do think the technology is important. I do think that we should be leveraging it to help make improvements in our lives. But I will always advocate for the human orientation inside of that. What does that look like for us? What does it look like for us when we see the headlines that say our jobs are going to be taken away, or when we see the headlines that say there's bias in mortgage predictions and so forth? How do we still stay human? How do we still connect like you and I are doing with our families? And so that was what happened for me. It was a responsible AI drift where I started to see our purpose and our values kind of separate from the work that I originally intended to be a part of.
Absolutely. And I think from your experience working with different organizations, nonprofit organizations, institutions, you've been able to see across a variety of different industries this specific impact. When advising these specific organizations on AI repeatedly, what did it reveal to you about human behavior that perhaps surprised you the most? Because I think we're kind of moving toward the human behavior of dependency on AI, I would say in a healthy or unhealthy manner, depending on the industry sector. But what stood out to you or surprised you most in your research?
What surprised me the most from at least a leadership and executive perspective were really two things. People were moving with urgency and fear. So they had kind of taken that human voided space where we typically sit with unanswered questions. They felt a need to rush to a decision because maybe their organization had communicated outward that they were looking for a certain AI adoption rate or return on their investment. So they were forced to make these decisions that were impacting not only them, but their staff without really understanding what the decisions were or understanding the second and third order consequences of those decisions. So that might look like a manager who's been told you're going to deploy this tool, but maybe you don't have the skill set. Maybe using AI is not in the employee's job description. Maybe there's a disconnect between the people and human resources organization and the actual technology deployment people. So there were all of these things that I found that leaders were sitting with tons of questions and they were being forced to make decisions without having the answers. And that too, I think, is a challenge with AI, is that it forces us to skip past sense making to some degree. Before AI or before it became very popular, if we had a vision for something, we might do roundtables or we might do workshops and we might think with our counterparts and our colleagues about certain things. Now you have AI to do that and someone presents that idea and we don't know if that's their framing or if it's AI's framing, but now we're talking about what the delivery was of that AI output. Does that make sense in terms of how to do the business? And so that's what I saw was I don't want to call it alarming, because as a researcher, I'm more of a observer at this point. But it was something that I saw that I thought was interesting, and I don't quite know the nuance of how that's going to impact our future.
Yeah, and I think from that top-down approach, having your employees immediately implement AI solutions in specific roles that they may not be trained to do could definitely have a ripple effect of impacting your bottom line, especially if it comes to stakeholder engagement, societal repercussions, lack of ethical oversight, utilizing that responsible AI framework into that decision making can definitely have some negative repercussions. But on that same note, what distinguishes leaders who genuinely integrate ethical reflection from those who treat it as a compliance exercise? As you mentioned, there's a sense of urgency. They're willing to go into AI debt to be a part of this market trend without really doing that internal diagnostic of their existing organization to see what existing tools would be most profitable to their existing structure versus, let's just experiment and see what sticks.
Yeah, I think to answer your questions, two things. In this age of accelerated technology, courage, and we shouldn't have to say it should take courage, but courage and intention. So when I worked with and researched organizations where responsible AI was advancing, there were some key characteristics across the leadership kind of team. One, they were accountable for the output of that particular AI. They knew it, the entire organization knew it, and that fed into their vision for why they wanted to have AI. So across the organization, the vision was communicated so that no matter where the employee sat in the organization, they could tell you why we're building this, why we're designing it, why we're using it, and who's ultimately accountable. The third thing was that the leadership team created pathways for engagement. So they took this column of unengaged employees and moved them to a column of engaged employees. And that might look like a town hall every month. It might look like asking employees for feedback for their policy. It might look like a hackathon, and it might look like some role play and having some participation in some use case and saying whether or not they wanted their particular tools sold to someone. So for those organizations at the very top, and like I said, in the age of AI, having to say courage is very interested, because many organizations might just say, this is what we're going to do. This is what we told our stakeholders and our board. And then everyone else has to deal with the repercussions of that. So it was fascinating for me to experience that, as well as research these very intentional leaders, which again is an example of purpose before code. They are choosing purpose. They are choosing AI purpose-driven leadership above everything else.
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to leaders in this specific market, there's so much pressure, especially when it comes to AI adoption, because your competitors are leveraging it, your clients are telling you to use it, they're expecting you to use it in some capacity. But how would you advise a leader, or in situations of your advisory roles at the organizations that you sit on, how should leaders balance competitive pressure with long-term societal responsibility in AI adoption? Because they can adopt quickly, but they're not necessarily focusing on that output aspect. Or they might be focusing so heavily on the output, but they're not really standing in tune with that competitive pressure to really advance their existing workforce, right? Or upskilling their talent.
Well, I'll be completely honest. I don't get to just normally walk into an organization and there's a blank slate. I typically have to come in based off of some decision that's already made. And depending on the culture of the organization, depending on where they are in their life cycle, I then have to kind of figure out a way to help orient the situation. So my advisory now is more of, okay, so you made a decision about this tool. Let's take a step back and let's have a conversation, and this is at the executive level, about what does this really mean? Why did you think you needed AI to solve a particular business solution? Why did you start with HR? Because maybe starting with HR might have been the longer term decision, but starting somewhere else might have been a shorter term. right? So we start kind of unpacking these kinds of conversations so that, one, we're not really poking holes at their decision. We're just trying to right the ship, if that makes sense. And so it really starts at the conversation level. That's where I'm best. If they can just kind of put their guards down and I say, I'm not here to judge your decision. I'm really here to just understand. There are also cases where maybe I might have to do some initial work, create a sample policy or create a sample pathway for employee engagement. And then we have a conversation about it. Part of what I like about my book is I've created 3 workbooks that are almost completed that would take leaders through that, as well as students. Like if you're leading or expected to lead an AI workforce, or expected to lead the decisions that have been made from your organization, how might you do that? And that workbook is a companion to my book, which gives them the space for reflection. Reflection is critical, and it might have to be something that they do on their own time, but at least giving them a guide for how to walk through this, I think is absolutely important.
Enjoying this episode of the Omega Podcast? We'd love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts or feedback in the comments. You can also check out omegaconsulting.online for more resources, insights, and industry updates. Now, let's get back to the exciting conversation.
Absolutely. Reflection is key to every executive decision making. And I think if you're not reflecting enough in your decision making, there is a huge divide, especially when it comes to, again, that output or the impact that your decisions are making on those around you. But in reference to your book, In the Age of Artificial Intelligence, Choosing Purpose Before Code, you had mentioned different types of frameworks that executives can leverage. If you had to redesign executive decision-making frameworks for the AI era, what is the first principle you would change?
The first principle, so let me just say this, responsible AI principles, the common ones across the globe are transparency, explainability, auditability, monitoring unbiased, fair, trustworthiness. I wouldn't change any of those because they are very much needed. And depending on the organization, one might be prioritized over the other. But what I would do is add a leadership principle, and that is pause. And the reason for that is what we've been talking about, is we're rushing all the time. You have to think about the human experience. Some people are now dealing with, as you mentioned, AI coworkers. Now a manager has to manage humans and AI. And then some people, before they even get to work, they may have experience with AI because maybe they're a child or they're a caregiver or someone they're using AI at home. And so all of these people come with their own perspectives and lenses about AI. And one of the best things that I've found by engaging employee stakeholders is by listening to the things that happen outside of work that could help inform how you do work. So I would add a principle. It would start with P, and it would be pause.
Pause. That is so crucial. And that's very challenging to do at an executive level because I think the common denominator is time, right? Everything is demanding your time. So being able to have that opportunity to pause, reflect, talk to your advisory board or your executive board, right? And to be able to share with them your input, your insight, what's shifting in the marketplace or what is being discussed as you're requesting feedback from your employees, from your stakeholders, and everyone else that has an impact in that decision-making process. But one thing that I really appreciate you sharing is part of pause is to acknowledge the human experience. What does it concretely mean to stay human in systems increasingly optimized for scale, speed, and automation?
Wow, that is a great question. And what it means is to create or maintain our sense of life so that we are not outsourcing our creativity, our decision-making, and our thought process, and our ability to connect with others to an AI system. If you think about how AI is developed, it's some data scientist that's creating and training some models, but that's based off of someone's lens. And so what happens is if you bring that lens forward as your own thought, you've actually just outsourced your creativity. You've outsourced your framing. And so your original thought becomes less visible. You can use AI to polish your thoughts. You can use AI to present your thoughts in a different way, but make sure that they are your thoughts. So creating this space that ultimately means that we are holding our original thought, our original way of being, and we're connecting still at the human level.
Yeah, still connecting at the human level. And I think that is something, regardless of what industry that you're part of, is being lost. I think having that essential human touch, I've heard clients in the past complain that whenever they get on a phone call to inquire about a simple business issue, they're constantly poised with an automated voice generating system. And I understand there's high call volumes and there's tons of different factors, but it's something that happens when you're able to just talk to another human being on the other line and just understand that there's a sense of empathy and or sympathy to what you're experiencing. But do you think AI is changing not just what we do, but how we define what it means to be competent or intelligent? Because now I feel as though the scale of what we classified intelligence to be has been modified due to the AI era we're living in.
Yes, I do. And my perspective is one, this is a great conversation for lots of people. I would love to have this type of conversation with school-age children, college students, leaders, because we all need to participate in how AI is kind of changing our ways of being. So, I mean, we can think about this in a number of different ways, but there has been history set before us to say that technology is going to change our ways. We're in the sixth industrial revolution, and we're in the seventh wave of change, I think it's called. And so each time we've been able to see how humans have been able to adapt. The thing with AI now is that opportunity between revolutions has changed. It's narrowed. So between the first and second, it was 60 years, the second and third, maybe 50 years. Now we're down to about 20 years where we are faced with how do we respond. So I would like to have that conversation be a little bit more broad than just my perspective. I try to steer away from those types of things because, again, I'm someone who loves to get people's perspectives, and then I'm a researcher, and then I filter that through my own lens and triangulation, and then feed it back out.
Yeah, for sure. I think you've definitely narrowed it to you rather receive that unstructured data from a collective source, because AI is not just impacting one group of people, it's impacting all of us on a day-to-day basis. So in order to just classify it from one person's perspective doesn't, again, we talk about blind spots. I mean, you're missing, the totality of how it's impacting in other areas that perhaps you and I both are not aware about. And I love the thumbs up, because that's exactly what people are feeling, is that people are utilizing these tools for not actually understanding how each tool could be impacting a marketplace, could be removing a job, could be enhancing another job, right? Creating new job frameworks. There's so many different opportunities, but one common denominator that we keep landing on is the human experience and how AI is impacting us. Where do you see the most subtle but dangerous erosion of human judgment happening today with the use of AI?
Oh, I think that's a great question. And I don't know if it's one particular area. As I see people leaning into generative AI, there is this excitement, and there should be, about how this tool can be used to help us see ourselves in ways that maybe we never saw ourselves, whether that's through imagery or whether that's a new focus or a new talent, whether that's helping with AI music or videos. Like we found, there's several ways that people are leveraging it for good. I think the part is, and I'll give you an example where some of us are not as tapped into what AI could be doing, and that to me feels a little unsettling. So there's a Facebook group. There's the Facebook group that has Facebook page. That's like 500,000 people. And it clearly says Lily's AI videos. It's a video of baby videos. But if you watch the engagement, people think these are real babies. And they're saying things like, oh, your baby's so cute. Why did you dress the baby that way? Or you shouldn't let the baby do this. And that to me is a bit unsettling, because there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that are engaging with this page. But the page is transparent. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not like the page owner is trying to hide that this these videos are not AI generated. So I think from my perspective, that's just one example. What if there's something else that pops up? Because it makes us feel good. It brings us to a good place. We're having a bad day, and then here we have an AI video of AI puppies, and now we think that they're real. And so I want us to have more conversation and experience with others, and maybe less on social media engaging with AI.
Absolutely. And I would even add, from my perspective, I think creativity in certain areas are being lost because of AI. I think in tandem with your response with the babies being AI generated, you can't discern what's being AI generated online to what someone actually developed and handwritten or hand painted, right? I had a guest months ago, but in reference to this, in regards to the music industry and how music is being generated through AI and how that is drastically impacting people's ability to discern between what's AI generated and what's human generated and what's the cross between. And my greater question is, who owns the rights, right, to that music? Is it the AI bot or is it whoever owns the AI? Okay. So I think that's definitely all in tandem, really playing a significant role as human beings in our ability to do the innate things that we were designed to do, right? Be creative, be able to discern between what's real and fake. I think now it's becoming very blurred. And to a certain extent, I'm concerned about that really impacting future generations to be able to have the cognitive know-how to discern between, again, what's real, what's fake, and what's questionable, because everything is starting to become this essence of it's real, regardless of what's being determined as real or fake. And we talk about deepfakes as well, being something to be aware about. But this all goes back to the ethical frameworks, right, that your book highlights extensively. Why do you think ethical frameworks so often fail when they move from theory into organizational practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. So 2 points of clarification. One, my book is not about ethical frameworks. It's a lyrical journey, a lyrical memoir about my particular journey in the AI space and all the things that I found where I had to wrestle with as a leader to get to the place where I am now when we're talking about staying human. So I wasn't just focused on the frameworks. The other thing is, I don't know if ethical frameworks are failing in great proportion. I think it depends on the organizational vision and the leadership vision. What is challenging is that for those organizations where responsible AI stalls, there is not clear ownership of the output of a tool. There is not a modernization of job descriptions to make sure that people understand that using AI is a part of their particular job. There's no vision across the organization about why AI is being used. And so there's a recent Gallup poll where it said like 66% of employees are using AI at work, and another 47% expect highly to be using AI highly. But then in the same report, 21% of employees feel like they're engaged at work. So that's a huge gap. They're getting these insights outside of work. They understand how to do AI readiness and how to work on integration. They're not new to technology transformation. The challenge is their insights are not being collected, they're not being received, they're not being prioritized, and there's no way for those employees who do have insights to feel like they're being listened to by their organizations. And so that's where I see some of the challenges, not just that ethical AI is failing, but just across the board. How are organizations and their culture ready to receive responsible AI practices as a part of their own values and principle system?
Yeah. You don't necessarily think about the cultural dynamic shifts that will play when AI is implemented into the organization. I mean, what role should dissent play inside AI-driven organizations, and how should it be protected or encouraged, or maybe in certain instances, it shouldn't be deployed at all?
Well, give me an example of what you mean by dissent.
Yeah, so if companies are looking to leverage agentic solutions, let's say integrate a bot that's going to hinder customer interaction, how should it be protected or encouraged, or should it not be, right? Do you want your employees to engage or your customers to engage in or not?
Yeah, so that goes back to the original point of the vision, because in your vision for AI as an organization, you should clearly lay out why this tool or this particular process that is being mapped to AI or implemented by AI or integrated with AI, why it matters. And organizations can use cases to help explain that. They can use a number of different things, but you have to help your employees who are doing the work understand how to connect back to that vision. How does their particular role connect back? A lot of times that stalling happens because there's fear. Employees think if I do this work, then that means that I won't be needed. And so there has to be a clear understanding of the vision of why AI is needed. It's just like building a home. What is your plan? You have this piece of land. So what are you going to do? Do you want 4 kitchens? Do you want 1 kitchen? Do you want 10 floors or 1 floor? It's no different, other than that there might be an existing structure already there. And so, and what I'm sensing is that when there isn't a cohesive leadership team and vision, AI just kind of scatters. You have different teams that are piloting different AI tools within the organization, totally disconnected and throwing the cybersecurity teams all the way off, and their information technology team. So again, starting at the top with a vision that cascades all the way out and making sure that there's ownership.
For sure. And I think you just raised a very important point that I believe our listeners should be, underlining, highlighted is security. What does cybersecurity look like? And that's not necessarily the point of our conversation today, but that's definitely a highlighted perspective that a lot of leaders are not taking the necessary time to dissect within their own organization. Now, AI, if used in an unstructured way, is actually providing numerous vulnerabilities to that organization. So I really appreciate you highlighting that in your response, because I don't think that's discussed enough. Can responsible AI ever be fully standardized, or does context always demand reinvention?
That's a very powerful question. So let's just take the term responsible AI out of this, and let's just put the word purpose or a vision. Let's just say values. Let's replace responsible AI with values AI. Mm-hmm. And then that conversation becomes very different, because as I mentioned, you can go to any organization's website and see what their values are. So let's just say we say that the value is data quality. Why don't we build AI around that? One of the simple mapping exercises that I do with organizations is I have them use a generative AI tool, take the URL to their About Us page or wherever their values is, and ask it to map to standard responsible AI principles. And many times they're shocked to see that they're already exhibiting the practice of being responsible. Does that make sense? I think it's this term that's throwing people off. We can have that conversation, as you mentioned, at the philosophical and the philosophical level, but it's that word and practice that tends to, I think, trip up some organizations. So when I go in, I say, okay, so we don't need to use the term responsible anymore. Let's use your values-led principles that map to fairness and quality and trustworthiness. It begins to look very different for an organization then, because they're already exhibiting and living through these values that they've established a long time ago. So I think it can be standardized if we do a bit of mapping, I'll say, to these principles. And then, just like any quality management tool or project management, there are frameworks, and you can, or cybersecurity, you can bring in a particular framework to map to those values, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so I just want to help organizations not get so caught up in the term responsible AI and maybe think more about the values that they hold. And why would you want to build something that doesn't map to the values that you say you hold, or even your social goals? around how you are a good stakeholder to the communities that you serve and clients and vendors. So that's where I tend to go, is start with what they're doing really, really well, and then figure out how we can map in the principles and set the right boundaries. You're already doing it with cybersecurity. You're already doing it with other software development efforts. You're already doing it with your product development. So let's not make this be one more thing that your organization and your employees have to think about.
Absolutely. And I think for a large portion of our conversation, we've definitely highlighted a lot about what organizations and corporations can be doing to improve their existing AI systems. But what role does communities play? And how should communities, not just corporations, participate in shaping AI systems that affect them?
Yeah, well, I think it's great. I don't want to put labor on a community that is already dealing with a number of, challenging situations. Maybe it's a population or just, I think we have to kind of define community. Community should be a partner. And it should be a stakeholder, just like any other stakeholder that an organization thinks about in the way it is being a good citizen to those stakeholders. And so really it just depends on what organization feeds into that community. If we're talking about proximity, like an organization around. So I'll give you an example. One of the organizations that I love is the American Swedish Institute here in Minnesota, but they are housed within a community that has lots of perspectives around lived experiences about being historically excluded, or that should be moved to the column of engaged. And so they're doing a very good job of outreaching, but the onus is not on the community. Does that make sense? It's on the organization to be a good partner and a good community citizen. So again, that's why I say I think it depends. I don't want to put any more labor on an existing organization. They need to be aware of what AI is doing in their particular world, just like everyone else. And where they can participate in helping shaping the future.
Absolutely. And as we reach the conclusion of our conversation, I just have one more question to ask you. I know this conversation can go on for hours, but I want to be very cognizant of all of our listeners' time. I know we want to continue to hear from you. But as we reach the end, I have this last question. If a reader finishes your book and only remembers one question to guide their decisions, what would you want that question to be?
How do I stay human in the age of artificial intelligence acceleration?
Beautiful.
How do I stay human in the age of artificial intelligence acceleration? How do I maintain my thought? How do I maintain my joy, my peace, the love that I have for people? How do I just maintain all those beautiful qualities that make me me?
That is so beautifully said. And thank you so much, Dr. Elizabeth Adams. And for those of us that are listening, please get that book, In the Age of Artificial Intelligence, Choosing Purpose Before Code. You can also check out Dr. Elizabeth Adams' website, which is www.eaadams.tech. That information will also be in the bio of this podcast. And before we leave our listeners, Dr. Elizabeth Adams, is there any final thoughts that you would like to share with our listeners?
No, I don't think so. I just want to say to you, thank you for this conversation about humanizing the architecture of change. It's really a really important conversation to have. Thank you for leaning into this. Thank you for curating the space for people to expand their knowledge about what is happening to them in this time. And thank you for the opportunity to help convey a message about how others can shape their future, the one that we'll all inherit.
For sure. Well, thank you, Dr. Elizabeth Adams, for being on the Omega Podcast.
Thank you so much.